Welcome back to Frameworks. In this episode, we're getting into strength training, not from a tactics perspective, but from principle. I'm going to walk through the three most important considerations when designing strength work that actually creates results. And these things aren't hacks. They are non-negotiable. I've seen them hold true across years of coaching athletes and general population. In this episode, we're going to break down why adaptation and not fatigue is the goal, how understanding intent can shape your entire approach, why leaving something in the tank is the key to sustainability and long-term progress. So if you want to cut through the noise, coach with purpose, and write strength training programs that actually do what they're supposed to do, this is the episode for you. So let's get into this and let's build a framework around longevity strength training. All right, guys, today we're going to dig into strength training and we're going to try to identify what does it mean to do good and principle-based strength training. And there's going to be a lot of, let's not call them hedges, but qualifications in terms of intention around this strength training. Okay. So first, let's just start with what I believe to be good strength training. So it's not about doing more. It's about doing what matters consistently and doing those things with purpose based on the outcomes that you're looking for. Okay. That was kind of a mouthful, but we'll kind of break that down over this episode. Okay. So much strength training in terms of how we implement it through program design is a lot of noise that we see today. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like there's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of ways to, let's just call it like quote unquote, skin the cat. Right. So there's a lot of noise out there through a lot of different mediums, So, we might have our favorite coach that we follow and respect. We might have, some YouTubers that we look at and listen to and get their take on things. And we like what they say and we respect them as well. We might be reading a lot of literature. We might be on social media and seeing a lot of stuff around protocols, program design, exercise selection, so on and so forth. So that's what I mean by it's a lot of noise. I don't want to bring a negative connotation there. There's just a lot out there. Okay. Volume doesn't necessarily equal adaptation all the time. We'll get into that later. And intensity doesn't always necessarily equal effectiveness either. We'll also get into that. If you don't respect recovery, adaptation just doesn't happen. So no matter how much you're doing or what the intention is, or, you're doing a drop set here or you're hitting a heavy single there, if you can't recover from those things, adaptation will not happen. And that's something that I'm excited to dig into today is this concept of adaptation, because if we really simplify it and we get down to the principles of strength training, it's all about adaptation. What are we trying to adapt to? And what are we doing to adapt to that thing? Okay, so the goal of strength work is to, let's just call it not to exhaust ourselves. That's not the goal entirely. Okay, it's adaptation with intention. All right, let's wrap a framework around strength training. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this in three main principles. Okay, so these are what I believe to be at this very moment, the three main things that we have to consider when we're building a strength training program for anyone. Okay, so principle number one is to drive adaptation, not just exhaustion. Okay, so the whole point of strength training is to give the body something meaningful to recover from, not to just feel tired or to feel a pump. Although those things might be the adaptation that you're looking for, it's not always, and it's always dependent on the adaptation that we're trying to drive based on what the goal is. Okay, so I talk to my people about this all the time. Okay, should I do more? I feel bad because I didn't do as much weight as I did last week, or so on and so forth. And kind of like my go-to line to my clients when we have this conversation, especially in person, is your brain doesn't know the difference between 40 pounds and 45 pounds. And they're like, well, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, what we do as coaches, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure you are as well. What we do as coaches is we look for objective measures because those objective measures just make our jobs easier because it gives us a clear answer. Okay, so when we start talking about things like adaptation, how do you feel? It's a little bit tougher, right? Like we have to dig a little bit deeper. Okay, so going back to that concept of our bodies don't know the difference between 40 and 45 pounds, there's a lot of truth in that. All our bodies know is that I worked hard today and I need to recover from working hard today. You see what I'm getting at there? It's like we're looking for that adaptation. So we can go to the gym and we can dumbbell bench press 40 pounds or 45 pounds last week. And then, we just got bad sleep or we're not recovering as well this week compared to last week. And we put 40s on, or we pick up those 40s and we're driving those 40s, and man, it feels harder than last week. We have two options. Do we put those dumbbells away and say, hey, I can't train this week because I'm not lifting as much as I did last week, and my coach told us that I need to build from last week, so this is just a garbage day, let me just pack it up and come back tomorrow? Absolutely not. All we're trying to do is drive that adaptation. If that 40 pounds feels tougher than the 45 pounds last week, awesome, who cares? All we're trying to do is drive that adaptation and give your body something to recover from. But if we're 4 weeks down the road and it's like 40, 35, 30, 20, okay, something's going on there. I'm more so just talking about a bad day, or a day that you're not able to just push with as much force than the week prior. Okay, so we're looking for the adaptation. We're not looking for exhaustion only, and we're not looking to just increase load from last week. Okay, so when we start talking about specific types of adaptation, now we have to start to get specific. And I'm not going to go too deep here because I don't want to spoil it, because this is another point of mine. But just to kind of surface level it, we have to understand what adaptation really means. Is it progressive overload? Is it neuromuscular adaptation? Is it structural change? Is it improvements in motor control? Right? So let's identify that, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, so adaptation requires a signal to the body, and then that signal causes some type of damage, whether it's to the nervous system, whether it's to the musculature, whatever the case is, and then we have to recover from that. Okay, so training too hard too often equals garbage results, no recovery window, so on and so forth. So we know that. So it's not, the adaptation isn't always fatigue. Okay, maybe it is when we're training for something like muscle endurance, but it's not always just fatigue. Okay, so an example of this is a coach writing a 5x10, so 5 sets, 10 reps at 75% because it feels hard. And the coach is just like, this is what I read in the book. Okay, this is what is going to work for you. And I don't know if it's going to make you stronger or build muscle or whatever the case is. I just know that I read it in the book, right? And maybe their goal was to actually increase in absolute strength in the bench press, and they're hitting 5x10. And this person is fairly, let's just call it experienced, okay? And they're not seeing any results with this person. It's like maybe the prescription was wrong. We're driving the wrong adaptation. Okay, maybe we're driving more of like a hypertrophy adaptation, so that person might grow some muscle tissue, but they're not getting a heck of a lot stronger due to their training age. So if there's no clear stimulus, there's no adaptation, stop programming just fluff and what we see and what someone might enjoy, and let's make sure that we're programming based on intentions. Okay, so that was one. Okay, number two, now we're starting to talk about, we're going from adaptation to intention specifically, and now I want to get into outcomes here. Okay, so you can't coach what you don't define. Okay, so that's intention. If we don't define something, we're not going to be able to accomplish it, or we're not even setting an aim to identify if we accomplished it or not, because we never actually identified what the intention of the thing is. So every strength cycle and program needs a purpose. Okay, so number one, define the intention or intentions. Is it strength? Okay, is it hypertrophy? Is it muscle endurance? Is it motor control? Or is it a combination of those four? So those are generally the four adaptation or intentions that we're trying to drive. I want to get stronger, so I'm going to get stronger through some volume, some intensity, some neuromuscular fatigue, right? Feeling heavy load. That's number one. Number two, hypertrophy. I want to build some muscle, and I'm going to do that through tension, time under load, and just damaging muscle tissue and recovering really effectively from that muscle tissue damage. And I'm doing it with high frequency generally. Muscle endurance. I'm challenging motor control. I'm doing a lot of volume. I'm doing extended sets. Load isn't that heavy. And I'm working to tolerance. Okay, so I'm working to fatigue. Motor control. Okay, so motor control, I'm just trying to move from point A to point B more efficiently. Okay, so I'm improving motor learning here. I'm improving coordination. I'm doing that through tempo and positioning, and every rep is perfect because, like James Fitzgerald always said, and this always stuck in my mind, it's like whenever we do a bad movement, we're time stamping that bad movement in our brains. So very similar to strength, when we're training the neuromuscular system to get stronger, we're training the same system or the same nervous system when we get into motor control and improving movement. Okay, so let's not timestamp bad movement patterns. So let's make sure when we're working on motor control, the intention is to move perfectly. Okay, so if you don't define that intent, your program becomes chaotic. And when your program becomes chaotic, you don't have an intention. And when you don't have an intention, you can't identify success. So if you don't know what success is, do you think your client is going to know what success is? So just something to chew on there. Okay, so your program should reflect this intention in load, in rest, in tempo, in position, so on and so forth. So we'll go over kind of like hierarchy of program design and kind of anatomy of program design in terms of those things in the future, like sets, reps, tempos, ordering, all that stuff. But just know that that stuff has to align with the intention. And like we talked about, it's probably one of those four that we just talked about, or a combination of those four. Okay, so that was number 2. Number 3, so this is our third principle. And this principle is one that is counterintuitive to some people. And this principle is to leave some in the tank. Okay, so we want to train hard enough to create change, but smart enough to keep training. Okay, so I'll say it again. So we want to train hard enough to create change or adaptation, like we talked about to start, but smart enough to keep training. So we need to be able to do it again tomorrow. Just have that I need to do this again tomorrow mindset. Okay, so the concept of submaximal exposure. Okay, so that's almost like minimal viable effort, right? Minimal viable load, volume, so on and so forth. So we shouldn't always do as much as we possibly can. We should change our mindset and give our clients just enough to create change. Always leave some in the tank. Okay. And now this goes back to the top where I talked about intentionality is really important. My bias in this day and age, and I think a lot of our biases should be this, biasly, this is for the long game. Sustainability and training should be our North Star. Okay. So it's one thing for me, I'm 39 years old. It's one thing for me to go to the gym tomorrow morning and train really, really hard and do the best that I can possibly do. But in my head right now, I'm thinking, man, I want to do this for another 30, 40, God willing, 50 years, right? And if I can do that, or if I want to do that, I need to reverse engineer from that. And I need to make sure that everything that I do is sustainable. And that doesn't mean that I don't go to the well sometimes, because I do, okay? But even when I go to the well sometimes in intensity and strength training, I always keep in the back of my mind, you need to avoid doing something stupid, okay? So that's the concept of sustainability. Let's make sure that we're doing things so that we can continue to do them for as long as we possibly can. Okay. You don't need failure to progress. Okay. You need consistency to adapt. Okay, so I think that's a really important principle that we need to keep in mind. Okay, we don't need failure. We don't need to hit failure to progress. We need consistency in our training so that we continue to give ourselves something to adapt to. Eric Helms put out a really interesting study in 2018, and this was supporting training with 1 to 3 reps in reserve for sustainable muscle growth specifically. So Helms, a big player in the natural bodybuilding world. So a lot of his research is built around naturally building muscle tissue. And that was just really interesting, right? It's like intuitively, we should know that, right? We should come 1 to 3 reps in reserve. So, you hit 10, you could have hit 11 to 13 to kind of put that to like a training model. Intuitively, we should know that we shouldn't be hitting failure, because if we hit failure, what is that going to do to subsequent sets? Okay. Intensity is probably going to go down, or the volume that we hit is probably going to go down as well. And then we're probably not going to recover as well tomorrow, so we could do it again. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Don't train to failure. Okay. Keep a couple reps in the tank. Okay. So clients who overtrain and regress versus clients who stay 1 to 2 reps in reserve and progress steadily, you can kind of see that play out in real time, right? I'll talk about, giving people bad prescriptions here in a minute. But you can see it in clients that you've done that to, and in particular cycles. So just take a client, right? Like imagine taking a client, or maybe you don't have to imagine, you've probably done this, where you go through a training cycle and everything's to failure. Everything's drop sets with 0 left in the tank. they're probably not able to hold on to that intensity for very long. Or probably a classic example of this is like GVT or German volume training, like 10 by 10, right? Where it's just like we're just overwhelming people with volume, and we get a couple weeks in, well, not even a couple weeks, we get a couple days in, and that person can't even move because they can't recover from all the volume that we've given them. So just keep those things in mind. Okay, so those are three really important principles when it comes to designing strength training for longevity. Okay, drive adaptation, not exhaustion. Know the intention behind the work and leave some in the tank. All right, now let's talk about a time. I'm going to talk about one of them. I have many of them, unfortunately, but a time where I went against these three principles. And I kind of mentioned it before on the GVT example. But that's a really clear just example and story when I was coaching someone, and I just went against all three of these principles and was just like quote unquote testing things. So I remember this really well. It was like 2010 or 2011, and I was deployed in Afghanistan at the time, and we had a lot of time on our hands, right? It was like either going on missions or training. Okay, so we had like this little like makeshift gym, which I was super grateful for on this little COP that we were on, or outpost that we were on. So we had this little makeshift gym that we put together, built that thing in like a week, some of my best work. And there was like, 10 of us that were like hitting it hard every single day. And I was coaching one of the guys there, or at least designing his training program. I wasn't doing much coaching, to be honest with you. And I gave him like a 10 by 10 protocol. And it was really stupid. It was like a 10 by 10 protocol, 3 days a week. And then the other 2 days per week, he was doing some pretty intensive, not aerobic work. It was honestly anaerobic work. So you can kind of just imagine the lack of recovery there. So, it was interesting, right? Like, and this guy was genetically gifted. So over the first couple weeks, dude couldn't walk on missions. And we're just like, yep, that's a really good training program. Week 3, week 4, he was actually seeing some really good adaptation in terms of muscle growth, and definitely not the way he felt, but the way that he looked. And he was able to keep up with loading across those 3 or 4 weeks. And just some like gnarly, I think it was biceps tendonitis or something like that. It was one of the Poliquin, I think it was like chest bi, and then quad hamstring. And then there was another day of something, GVT splits that I gave him, and just gnarly biceps tendonitis on, I think it was on one or both of his biceps. And that very quickly turned into a ruptured bicep. I'm just deadlifting like 225 pounds, and this guy could deadlift probably 600 pounds. And it was definitely due to lack of recovery, and lifestyle wasn't really we didn't have the ability to eat really good food and get a bunch of sleep. So I'm just like compounding all of this volume and training on him, and a light bulb went off immediately. And this sounds so stupid, right? But I was in that moment, I was like, more is not better, better is better, right? And it was like, I've heard that before, but it hit me in the face, right? Because I just like ruined this guy's deployment, honestly, because I gave him such a stupid training program and just hammered him over a very intense month without even thinking about recovery, right? So I went against all three of those principles, right? Like, I didn't have any intention behind it. I didn't focus on adaptation and what we were really trying to adapt to. I just kind of like was throwing everything at a dartboard and hoping that it stuck. So I totally messed this guy up. So I went against all three of those. And there's other examples with like competitive athletes that I've trained that I've done the same with, where they were just like really high level. And in my brain, I'm just like, you got to continue to give them more and more and more and more, because that's the only way that they're going to get better. And I didn't think of like that minimum effective dose mindset. And there's definitely times and seasons to push it. But I just made a bunch of mistakes there. So if you haven't already made those mistakes, or if you have made those mistakes, let's work together and not make those mistakes in the future by following those three principles. Okay. So just make sure that we're really focusing on minimum effective dose. Let's make sure that we're focusing on long-term structure and connection. And when I say connection, relationships are always a part of this thing, but I don't mean that specifically. I mean connecting what we're doing to ourselves, what the program that we're doing, we need to be connected to that. If we're designing it, we need to know the intention, and then we need to connect our clients to that. Okay. So we can all be on the same wavelength, because we're kind of behind computers just typing away in CoachRx and just saying like, yep, intentions are really good here. But if we never share those intentions and connect those intentions to our client, that will all go for naught, because we're leaving out the most important person in this thing. And that's the person that's actually doing the work. So make sure that we connect. Okay. And this applies, and it's probably even more important in online and group models. So I'm actually running a group model right now with Proof 3. And this is something that, is not new to me, but it's something that I hadn't done in a long time, where it's just like, because I'm not giving these people all a one-to-one program, I got to work like twice as hard to make sure that that connection and intent is there. And we have to make sure our coaches are actually conveying that intention every single day. So that's why with what we're doing, we're honestly, we're like an education model in terms of connecting. And we don't do a perfect job of it every time, because sometimes it's just very challenging, but we do the best that we can, and we're always trying to get better there. But you can do that in a group model, is why I tell that story. So in a group model, we need to have that connection. We need to understand what minimum effective dose is, and we need to figure out how does Joey and Susie and Bobby and whoever is in that group session, how can we identify that they're all getting that minimum effective dose and we're not taking them to the well in strength training. Let's think about how we do that in long-term formats as well. So there should be an opportunity to connect the long-term in that format as well. And then as well, in the online model, right, it becomes really, really important, because again, it gets really easy to sit behind CoachRx, plug away in programs, deliver those programs, and never talk about them. So use things like coaches notes with your online clients. Okay, really important. That's why we put in Loom videos, right? Increase efficiency a little bit there. Maybe at the beginning of every week, the first day, you just take 2 minutes, do a quick Loom video, and just say, hey, this is what we're doing. Here's the intention. Here's the structure. Here's the dose response that we're trying to get, or use whatever language they would understand. And just take time to really communicate and connect there. So one-to-one, I think one-to-one in person, I think is the easiest to make sure that we're falling in line here. And then group and online, I think we need to work a little bit harder to make sure that we're conveying these messages to our clients. All right, so to close this out today, what I want to do is I want to ask you to stop after I tell you these instructions and do these. If you're in a car, you can't do them right now. Write it down. I really want everyone to just take 5 minutes and go through this exercise. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to pull up a week of strength training that you've written for a client. Just think about your best work. Like, what is your best work? Pull that up. Okay. I think we all have that up now. We have, 7 days, 2 weeks, whatever we have designed for that client. And I want you to ask yourselves a couple questions. Okay. Question number 1, what adaptation am I chasing with this strength training program? What adaptation am I chasing? Number 2, does the structure reflect the intention? Okay. And then number 3, would this let someone train tomorrow, or would it absolutely crush them? Okay. And that's, maybe that's no, and that's the intent behind the program, but just ask yourself that question, and whatever the answer to that question is, just ask yourself, is that correct based on the adaptation and the intention? Okay. So number 1, what adaptation am I chasing? Number 2, number 1, what adaptation? Number 2, does the structure reflect the intent? And then number 3, would this let someone train tomorrow, or will this annihilate them? Okay. So coaching strength is pretty simple, but it's not easy, because we always have to check ourselves, and we have to check our egos, and we have to make sure that our clients check their egos. Not only every week or every cycle, but it's every cycle, every week, every session, every set, every rep, right? And then we could break it down in the eccentrics of that rep, and if you're asking for pauses and all of that stuff, right? So it's really simple to build those, but it's not easy to implement. So we got to make sure that we stay on those things. So let's get the principles right. Let's build the framework, and let success and gains flow. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing you guys next week.